We are experiencing the toughest phase of our lives, and this is being called as the greatest stress test of history because of all reasons. It's crushing, it's traumatizing, and it's really, really dark with, as of now, no glimmer of hope in sight. As of now, we hope it gets better. We hope life gets a chance. We hope we are through this pandemic. But as of now, what we are seeing is all dark. This is like the same situation, almost the same situation, if not the same, the similar situation as is portrayed in the title of the novel of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Spanish Nobel Prize winner, Colombian novelist, Love in the Time of Cholera, where he talks about two paradoxical things. You're doing love, but in the time of cholera. The same way, in the time of pandemic, we are talking about certain things which we normally don't talk about. We feel and we can only hope and pray, but there's a feeling that a certain proportion of entire human population may be at the brink of possible extinction, because the way it's taking heavy toll on our lives, this COVID-19 or coronavirus, the way it's affecting our lives. So it's really very, very scary. It's really very, very dark. Now, the point that we are talking to you right now is that what is the scope of thinking and what is the meaning of producing art and literature in these trying times? We don't know what's going to happen next. And the point that we can ponder on it for a little longer, that we find that what is the meaning of thinking about such things as art and literature and contemplation and thinking in such moments? Well, we are talking about the other side of pandemic. Of course, it's a health emergency. Of course, we have been confined to our homes and we have all the time to be with ourselves. And the world before Corona, as it's called as BC, before Corona, was so busy that we didn't have time even to think about our own selves. Now we have all the time. So that is where the contemplation begins, and that is where the thinking emanates from. And that exactly makes this topic even more relevant than it was ever earlier. Well, we can hold it back for a while, but we can't call it the better side of pandemic, because pandemics do not have better sides, ostensibly speaking, physically or practically speaking. Pandemic is something that a humankind can only imagine of. But pandemics can't be, we don't in fact anticipate for ourselves. We don't pray for such things. We don't hope for such things can happen. But when we are struck by calamities, when we are struck by such, such things that pose a great threat to human life, what do? As there's no crisis in human history which has not come with some good, bright things in it. And let's take this pandemic as an opportunity, as a chance to think about certain things that we were not thinking about earlier. I am reminded of one of the greatest living historians, anthropologists of the world, Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval Noah Harari is the one who is shaping up the thinking of the modern thinkers. Yuval Noah Harari writes in one of his famous books that became all the rage in the world and that sold millions of copies and that got translated into many languages the world over, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. He talks about the progress that humankind made, the progress of addressing the issues like famines, like plagues, like wars, and he says that now the epidemics, famines and wars and other things are long over. Well, we can't talk about war. The threat of war still looms large. The convention of war is no more. The wars are no more fought with the weapons as we would fight them earlier with. But let's keep war aside. But at least pandemics are over. This is what Yuval Noah Harari says, that the pandemics are over. So he poses a challenge to humanity. He says that what will now bankers and presidents and corporate heads and others do? Because now the challenge is over. And Yuval Noah Harari says, what will they do? Write poetry? They can't sit home all day and just think about doing certain things that they have done long before, decades and centuries earlier. But now we are seeing that we have been thrown back into the medieval ages. Of course, as Harari says, success breeds ambition, because he says now that humankind has succeeded in earlier ambitions, that the targets that they had earlier set for themselves, those targets are no more there now. Now the targets are different. Now the targets, as he says, there are 3 targets that he sets. The first target is immortality, second is happiness, and the third is divinity. He says that humanity has set 3 targets. One, that we have to be now permanently alive, we have to be permanently happy, and we have to be permanently powerful. These are the 3 challenges now for humanity, not the earlier challenges where we had to fight cholera and other things, where a small virus could break out and then it would take the entire world by surprise and it would swallow millions and millions of lives together. Now the targets are different. We have to think about as to how to create a drug through which we can address the problem of death even. Because there is a theory that death actually is a genetic or technical problem. The technical problem has a technical solution. So entire humanity will now be thinking over making a drug or devising a technical solution for something that will make you not immortal but immortal. Now that's a very tricky question. You think that will there ever be the time that human beings would ever think of dying but never die? That's what he calls as immortal. That's not like defying death in the face. That's like making death irrelevant. And he takes the example of that, what he calls as Gilgamesh project. Gilgamesh was the character who defies death, who's all ever, he lives and lives and lives and never dies. Because he has taken up that, that challenge, that he's not going to fall a prey to death. He'll not be targeted by death. So the first target is that. The second is that we want to be permanently happy. It sounds crazy that how can we be permanently happy? That means that even if you are struck by grief, even if somebody is rolled over by a truck, will the bereaved be still permanently happy? That defies the logic of emotions. But Yuval Noah Harari provides the logic that actually happiness is the biochemical manipulation that happens within us. Happiness is the name of the movement of certain hormones within us. So if we can regulate the movement, the upgoing and downcoming of those hormones, so we can always be happy. So the challenge is to maintain that balance of those hormones that create happiness. And the third is that now Homo sapiens would be converted into Homo Deus. Humans are gods now. That was the third challenge that humanity had set for itself. That Homo sapiens will now be Homo Deus. God. Deus is the Greek word for gods. Now there will be human gods, because they will be now all powerful. We will not be controlled by some divine power that religions give different names to. Now we will be our power ourselves. So these 3 challenges, permanently alive, permanently happy, and permanently powerful. Imagine now humanity at this point contemplating of addressing these 3 challenges, and suddenly the pandemic happens. Now what do you do? As of now, what do we have? As of now, we have that hope. But till then, that hope becomes the real plan that fructifies, that's successfully executed. What do we do with this pandemic? And how do we control, or how do we contain ourselves, and how do we shift our minds towards certain things that we can still do? Set aside those three challenges that I have talked about. Now we have some different things that we can do, because we have been, as of now, we think that we have been relegated to stone ages. This one invisible dot of a virus is changing the entire complexion of life that we are facing right now. But now what do we do? What has this situation has now thrown some different things for us. Those values we are going to discuss, which now we human beings realize, that earlier we may not give value to certain things. Now we are giving that value. The first value that I'm talking about, that I'll discuss, is the value of attention. Before Corona, this was a great subject for many social scientists, as that we are losing attentions. Our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. That they would call it that we are facing a psychological, mental, emotional vertigo, because everything is blurred. We don't have time to think, we don't have time to sit, we don't have time to contemplate. So the first thing that we are now valuing right now is attention, because attention was earlier a missing commodity. About attention, we may not forget this fact that humans have been given attention in a very limited supply. This is what a famous psychoanalyst, Winifred Gallagher, calls as cognitive cash. Because you have cash, but you have cash, even if you are millionaires, but still that cash is in a limited supply. That is exhaustible. That is why this exhaustibility of attention makes her call it as either cognitive cash or mental money. That is why when we say that we pay attention, what do we pay? We pay attention the same way as we pay money. It's like paying money, because focus is something that we have in a limited supply, and we only choose to focus on the things that we choose. So in that meddlesome world, in that chaotic world, what we had lost was the attention. And at a time when we find that we are confined to our homes, when we find that we have all the time in the world to think, we are valuing something we had lost the value of. That is attention. That was the first. The second is the value of time. That again actually is the offshoot. It is the outcome of the first thing. Value of time, this is the reverse of it. Earlier we didn't have time. We were too busy. Now in a reverse way, we are finding the value of time. As Ghalib would say, fursat kise ki teri tamanna kare koi. That who had got time to think about you. Our relationships would demand time. Our selves would demand time. Our life per se would demand time. But we didn't have. We would think that we are indispensable. Now that indispensability factor is coming under a sharp focus. And now we are in a state of siege. And as the famous Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish says, that in a state of siege, time becomes space. That time has got now converted into space, because it's now, as he says, transfixed in eternity. And we no more think as of now that we are that indispensable as we earlier would think that we are. Because that is the value of time that we are now trying to understand, that it is absolutely necessary for our lives, that we have to water it with time so that the plant finally takes roots and grows. So this is what pandemic has shown, and this is what pandemic has taught us. The second value, the value of time. Third is the value of home. Now when I say home, I mean home as a metaphor for space. Home is what Virginia Woolf, that famous feminist writer, one of the greatest authors of English language, she calls it a place of one's own. That place of one's own that gives a meaning to your life, that lends you an identity of your own. That's your home, where you are, where you belong. Home is what Henry David Thoreau called Walden, life in woods. He relinquished the humdrum, the chaos of life, and then slipped into a territory that he found as his home. That was a forest, that was an isolation, that was a seclusion, but he called that as his home. Now when we say home, we mean that cherished place, that space, that whether Walden goes into woods or Virginia Woolf confines herself into room, that space is your home. And when there are crises like these, where there is a life-threatening situation outside, you cling to your home like a baby, like a frightened baby cuddles in the lap of his mother. That's our home. Because in a very busy life earlier, home would act like a restaurant where you would just come and sit and stay and go back. Our offices would consume or would suck more of our times than our homes. But as of now, we think and we really feel that now home is your kingdom. So that is the third value that the pandemic teaches you. The fourth value is the value of money. Money is the fuel that runs the engine of the world. Money, without it, we can't think of a prosperous life. We are not talking about money only in that corporate sense. We are not talking about money only in that sense that where you think that if you can't be wealthy, you can't live. We are talking about the money that runs your life, without which life will stop. Now, how this pandemic teaches us the value of money? It teaches us value of money both ways. It teaches us that how much money is important, one, and the flip side, the reverse side of it, that how much money is unimportant. Unimportant part needs to be understood in a very creative manner, in a very philosophic manner. Unimportant because if we think, like in many places in the world, where the presidents of those countries would think that if we would close down our business centers, we would suffer a huge loss. So they preferred to open. They preferred not to close down those business centers, those commercial hubs and cities. Why? Because they would not like to lose that money which they would gain otherwise. Now what happened? They gained money, but they lost lives. That is where such a situation makes us understand the real value of money. That is where such pandemics make us think that even if we have less money, but we could save ourselves, we are better off while being home. If we venture out of our home in a bid, in an attempt, or in a craving to earn more money, we are risking our lives. So when it's a choice between life and money, it's a trade-off. But the choice is open, and the choice is clean, and the choice is clear, because life is something that is beyond money. If there's whole money around you, but there's no life, money has no value. Money has value when there is life. So that is the fourth value that this pandemic teaches us. Otherwise also we had this thing in mind, but practically such a situation stares us so hard and so painfully in the face, so that we get the real value of money, of having it and not having it. The fifth is the value of perishability, impermanence, the temporary nature of this world, of this life. We are not talking about any philosophical or intellectual or theological concepts whereby saints and prophets have said that life is perishable. Even if saints and prophets and scriptures would not have said life is perishable, life still was perishable. With corona or without corona, life still is perishable. But this situation teaches us the value of perishability. Life is beautiful. Why? Because life is perishable. All perishable things are beautiful because we are deeply conscious of the things that one day they'll be taken away from us, or one day we will be taken away from them. I am reminded of that great epigraph that a famous English poet, T.S. Eliot, uses for his famous poem, Wasteland. In the Wasteland, he uses an epigraph of what he names as Sibyl. Sibyl is basically the concept of woman prophet in Greek mythology. Apollo is the god, Sibyl is that woman prophet. Sibyl had prayed to God that I may be allowed to live for as many years as the particles of dust that I can carry in my hand. That means unlimited. And then Sibyl grows and grows and grows and doesn't die. Then Sibyl is just sitting and she is surrounded by young boys, and the boys ask her, "Oh Sibyl, what do you want?" And she says, "I want to die." Because when Sibyl prayed for an eternal life, she forgot to pray for eternal youth. She said, "I may live forever." She didn't say that I may stay young forever. So when she doesn't die, she reaches the dead end, she squeezes, she shrivels, then finally she prays that may she die. So that is the value of perishability, that if we do not perish, we decay, we rot. So it's much better we perish, we die, than we rot, because that is what gives real meaning to the life. As the great Ghalib would say, "Na ho marna to jeene ka maza kya," that if we don't die, what is the taste of life? So it's actually the fragility, the vulnerability that makes life livable. And such a condition makes this value doubly valuable, that we come to understand the real value of life when the life feels such a threatening situation as we are facing right now. The sixth value is the value of company. What's that company? Human company, not the company of machines only. We might have, before Corona, we might have hated others, as we would think that we are the most important people, we are the most indispensable people, and in a way that I may think that I am the center of gravity and the rest of the earth may revolve around me. I am the pivot and the rest is the periphery. But now we are desperately looking for human companies. Our gadgets are helping us connect to our fellow human beings, because it's not possible to venture out of home and to meet them, to hug them, to shake their hands, to see them physically, to go near, to meet, to cherish the value of intimacy, love. So this is the time when we are so deeply, so painfully, so intensely understanding and appreciating the value of company. Company is actually the name that we give to relationships, because human beings are fundamentally about relationships. As they say that man is not an island. Of course, women too. When we say man, we mean human beings. So you're not an island. You can't squeeze your borders. You can't remain confined within yourself, just talking to yourself, unless somebody talks to you. As they say that if you're alone, you can enjoy only. But if you're together, you celebrate. If you're alone, you can smile. But if you're together, you laugh. So if you want to laugh and celebrate, you really need a human company. Now, how do we come close together? Now, our gadgets are helping us come close, but there is a difference between high-fiving your partner and appreciating his performance by just clashing your hand with his hands. There's a great joy that we now understand, that how great and intense the joy you feel when you hug, when you shake somebody's hands. But that joy, as of now, has been snatched from us. And that is why we are feeling the absence of that joy. And that is why the absence of that joy makes it much stronger and much more deep and painful as it ever used to be before. Seventh value is the value of imagination. Now, here is where we come closer to art and literature. What is art and what is literature? There's a very nice thing that C.S. Lewis said about. He compared friendship with art and philosophy. And he said that friendship, like art and philosophy, has no survival value. But the thing is that it gives value to survival. That's a very profound thing that he has talked about. That we may think that art has no survival value. Art perishes Like earlier we talked about the value of perishability, so art also falls in that domain, literature also falls in that domain, friendship also falls in that domain. Everything perishes, but the thing is that even if it doesn't have in itself intrinsically a survival value, but the thing is that this gives meaning, this gives the essence to survival. If it doesn't exist, nothing exists. So beyond that material well-being, now we are thinking about new art and new literature. And every such life-threatening situation gives rise to not just life-saving situations, but life-enhancing, life-watering and life-originating things as well. That is where the new art is originated. That is where the new literature comes into being. So that links us with this imperishability of art and literature and imagination. When we don't find answers in mathematics, what do? We turn to art. There are certain questions that baffle us in our lives. All medical scientists and all mathematicians and all other lab sciences are thinking about certain things that must have practical results. But when it doesn't happen as we think it should, when it doesn't happen as we script it should, what do? We shift our attention to these things like art, like literature, like philosophy. And a situation like this makes it all the more important, because art is actually the language of mysteries. Imagination grows out not in the lab, it's not produced or created in the lab. Imagination grows out of contemplation, and contemplation takes time. Actually, all these values are linked to each other. When we talk about attention, simultaneously we are getting conscious about time. When we talk about time, we talk about perishability. We talk about perishability, we talk about companionship. It's a daisy chain. Everything is strung with each other. There is nothing that we are talking in isolation. Now that we are facing an entirely new situation, we are going back to the old things as well. We hope it goes. We pray it goes. But as of now, till that happens, we are unto our own selves, thinking about these values, coming out with new ideas, coming out with new theories, and giving life the maximum we can. With these words, I take your leave, and I thank you very much for giving me your company that we cherish the most, especially in these trying and painful times. Thank you very much.